Hello, welcome back to the workshop. Today we're going to be continuing on the Viking Longship. This is now part 4 and we're going to be making the sail and the mast and all of that jazz today, so let's just get straight into it. I've now lit the forge and I've got a piece of 20mm round bar heating up in the fire. And so I'm going to use this to forge out the bottom, sort of the base of the mast. So if you look on the ships, there's often like a bulge in the middle of the deck where the mast then goes into. And so I'm going to put a taper on both ends and then just flatten it, and hopefully that's going to give us sort of the shape that these things resemble, and we can rivet that on to the deck. When we look at the mast and the sail as a whole, there's not much evidence for the sail itself, if you know what I mean, as in the archaeological historical evidence. There's not much in terms of the sail, because they were made of wool or fibres, but I'm pretty sure they were made of wool, and so that material degrades over time, and over the 1,000 years that these ships were often in the ground, there's nothing left of the sail when you dig them up. I don't think anybody's ever found a fully intact sail on a ship. So as for the design that I'm going to go with for the sail, there's not much that I can base it off. It's even disputed if the sails were square. We don't even know that. We don't know anything about the design, whether, you know, a lot of people nowadays picture the sails with patterns on and designs, and we don't really even know if they're accurate because we can't have any historical evidence of the sails. The sort of most common one is the red and white stripes, so maybe I'll do something resembling that for the sail. So I'm guessing where I'm going with this, really, in terms of the height of the mast, the size of the sail, the shape of the sail, the design on it. I'm sort of guessing it all, trying to base it off the archaeological evidence that there is, but there's very limited material for us to actually base it off. Anyway, there's going to be quite a few tenons that I've got to forge on, like the mast and the mast supports. I say quite a few, there's only going to be 3 tenons, or maybe, actually no, there'll be 5 tenons. So there's a few tenons to forge, this little support piece, and then the top bar and the mast itself. We'll start on this and then move on to those other bits in a minute. So I've got one taper forged out. I've just got to do the same to the other end and then flatten it. You'll notice I upset the end a little bit to put a round on it, and that was so when we squashed it, we ended up with a rounded end. It does want to be cleaned up a little bit with a grinder, then all the holes drilled and it being riveted on to the deck, but that's all cold work, so I'll leave that till later. We'll set this aside and I'll start forging the mast and all the tenons and bits and bobs on that. As I said before, I've got quite a lot of tenons to forge, and so there are a few different ways in which we can do this. If you had a power hammer, which I don't, but power hammers obviously make a lot of things a lot easier. And if we do, forging tenons can be much easier with a power hammer because you have that fixed bottom die and a top die, and in theory they should come down and meet in the same spot every time. So if we have our bar that we want to forge the tenon on the end of, we just come on the near edge of your die and section off your 2-sided isolation on 2 sides. At the anvil, there's sort of a few different options that we can do. One is just using a hammer on the near edge and coming down at that perfect spot, or right on the edge of the anvil and with the back edge of your hammer. That way, if you're accurate, you can forge a nice 2-sided isolation. Now, I'm not very accurate with that. I often get sort of wibbly wobbly shoulders, so I tend to use these little contraptions, basically just 2 6mm round bars that one rests on the anvil, this one comes on top, and you just section off your material that way. So you can create a nice shoulder and then come in and forge your tenon out. This is effectively just a deconstructed guillotine tool. You know, a guillotine tool just has dies which do this job. This way I've never got around to making a guillotine tool, to be honest, so this way works fine for me. I've got a piece of 12mm round bar now heating up in the fire, and that's what I'm going to use for the main mast going up out the deck, and so it needs a tenon on the end to rivet down onto the deck. And through that support piece that we've just made, it's going to go through there, through the deck, and rivet. You'll notice we don't have a very clean shoulder at the moment. So to clean that up, I've got a monkey tool, which is just a block of steel with a hole in. And we can now upset the material there, forming a nice square shoulder on that top surface. There we go, got a nice clean shoulder now. So on the rest of this piece, I want to put a gradual taper coming up to the point, and it all wants to be nice forged texture as usual. Because I've got this end hot, I'll work it back this way, so I'll form a reverse taper rather than quenching that end off and flipping it around. I'll just form it this way. We can put this to one side, and I'll just quickly forge up the crossbeam, which is going to be what the sail is going to be attached to, and then that in turn gets attached to the mast. And all that I'm going to do with that is put a slight taper on both ends of a bar and forge, get a nice texture on all of it. I've got the mast secured in the vise, and I've drilled holes in both the mast and this cross piece, but I'm not going to rivet them, I'm going to tie them together. As this bar, which is the bar where the sail is going to be fixed on, this I believe is, raising the sail, lowering the sail. This bar can be raised and lowered, so it's not fixed in place, so I'm going to tie it. And then I've got to make two little supports later, which this would rest on when it's down. So I've drilled a 4.5mm hole, and I've got a length of 4mm bar, which I've tapered just the very ends to finish them off. I'll probably finish them off with a little tight rat tail. I'll get this in the fire and hopefully tie these together. This piece is cooled down and I've drilled some holes in it, so I'm going to rivet it onto the deck just with, again, little pieces of 4mm round bar. I've also drilled a hole back here. That's going to be for the mast support, which I'm going to make in a minute. And this has 3 holes in, so I'll rivet it on that side, then this side, and then the one in the middle is where the mast is actually going to go through. Also, I've realised I'm going to have to grind the head of this rivet off, otherwise this isn't going to sit flush. So I did all of that completely wrong, as I got this hole messed up with this hole. It is in fact, I'm going to be riveting this piece through that hole, and then the mast support is going to go through that hole. I knew I was doing something wrong then, because I was going to have to grind that rivet off, and I knew that was wrong. Anyway, yes, this is being riveted on through there, and then going to drill another hole through there, rivet it on those 2 points, and the mast will go through the middle. Now we've got this piece on, I'm actually going to be leaving this for a while because I don't want to rivet the mast on until I've made the sail and put the sail onto the mast. I've made one of the stems of these supports, and you can see I'm putting 2 tenons, one on either end. This one is going to be down onto the deck, so it's smaller, and then that one is going to be where the top piece comes on, which is going to be a section like this with a bit more shaping. I need to do what I've done to this one on this one. You'll notice that these have a polished finish, and that's because I didn't forge this. I just did some bench work and cut these tenons on. So that is another way that you can do tenons, but of course it's not a forged tenon, it is a tenon that I've filed and ground down to shape. And I'm doing that mainly just because this is 8mm round bar, and I think for trying to forge a tenon which is about 4mm round is going to be a little bit tricky, so I've given up, and I'm doing it just with files and a grinder. I'll mark where I want the shoulder of the tenon to go. I'll score that with the grinder and then come back with the file. The disc on the grinder leaves a bit of a radius to the shoulder, so I can come in with a file and carefully get it back so it's a nice square shoulder. There we are, a nice square shoulder. So I'll do the same to the tenon on the other end. Then we've got to forge the top piece. I forged out one of the top pieces. It's effectively just, again, a flattened piece of 8mm bar with 2 little slots on, which is where we would actually put that cross beam that would rest in those. It needs a hole drilled there so that this tenon fits up through there, and then it will get riveted on. I've also ground these tenons down a little bit more, so these ones are about 3mm, that one's about 4, and that's so we've got, because this is, you know, it's only about 4mm thick, maybe 5mm thick, so we're going to be struggling to get that tenon through there if it was 4mm, so I've taken it down just a little bit more, and also it needs to be cut to length. It's a bit long. Anyway, I'll show you how I made this. It's relatively simple. I just forged it flat and then knocked in these two little areas. There we go. So I'll just cut it off the bar and then drill a hole through the centre, ready for riveting. I've done this first rivet. You can see how this is going to look. And you'll notice that the rivet itself is longer in this direction than this direction. And to do that, I peened it over with a cross peen like that, rather than just the face of a hammer, which is going to move the material in all directions the same amount. We can force it along the bar by using the cross peen. I can now rivet this piece onto the deck, which is where it's actually going to go. There we go, looking pretty good. It's now the next day. I've got the square for the sail cut out just out of like 2mm sheet steel. So I'll put this in the forge, get a nice texture on it, forge texture, and then begin to sink it into a bit of a sail shape. I've got a plan to try and use one of these fire pit bowls to actually put the shape into the sail. It may be a mistake, I don't know. I'm going to try and sink it first. If that doesn't work, I might try raising it, so flip the bowl over. But I think hopefully it's going to work, and it'll be an easy way to get a nice, neat, even bend in the sail. I think that was the most ridiculous thing I've ever done, but it seems to have worked. It's definitely not what that is made for, but we've got a sail and it's looking pretty sail-like. I've drilled 2 holes in the crossbeam on the mast, and I've drilled 1 hole at the top here so I can rivet, and I'm going to rivet the sail on rather than trying to tie it, as that was a little bit of a nightmare to try and tie that bit, so I'm just going to rivet this on. But I can rivet it on this side and then, you know, do the same as I've been doing with the ship, just fix that in place, drill through the existing hole in the crossbeam and then rivet that on that side. So here we are. The end is now in sight. It's looking very much like a Viking Longship. I'm really happy with how it's looking. Unfortunately, everything is now slightly out of proportion, as these little mast supports, which I've riveted on both the front and the back, so we've got 2, are way too high for the rest of the proportions of the ship. These are actually, in proportion to the ship, these are about 5 meters high, whereas really they would only be like 1.5 to 2 meters high. So that's something that is a little bit of a downside, but if you look at the overall effect, it is pretty cool. Maybe the mast is too high, I don't know, but it's getting there. The sail, I'm liking it. You know, it's a pretty simple sail. I didn't do any patterning on it or anything, but I think it looks pretty cool. Also, it's not actually attached yet, so I haven't riveted it on, as I think it's going to be easier to get things like the shields and the oars in with this not being riveted on and in the way. So that might be one of the last things again that I do, is actually rivet the mast and the sail onto the deck. I think it's looking pretty cool. I hope you're all excited for the shields. The shields, again, I've tried to do the shields in proportion, which is meaning that they're then going to be out of proportion with things like the mast rests. But trying to do the shields in proportion means that I'm doing 28, and so hopefully there's going to be more of you being able to make the shields rather than doing 20 shields with them being a little bit bigger, but then less of you could actually make a shield and get it on the ship. Anyway, I'm really happy with how it's looking. I think it's really cool. It's coming together as I imagined, and that's always good when you finally get to see a project coming. The lights at the end of the tunnel now. We can see the end. I'm going to leave it there for this video. The sail's all forged out, and the sail sort of rests, as I'm calling them. They're all riveted onto the deck, so it's looking good. I'm happy with where I'm at the end of this video. Hopefully in the next video I'm going to be doing the oars and the rudder, and I may be putting some rigging onto the sail, some rope, which I think will be pretty cool if I ever get around to that. Anyway, thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you on the next one.